And here on The Beat, we've been learning from people cooperating with this new DA grand jury probe and other witnesses. Which brings us to tonight's special report right now on Weisselberg as the man who may tip Trump's legal fate, and thus his business life and political career more than any other person we know of. What are we learning? Number one, this is no typical employee or worker. The ex-president's favorite rapper famously said, "I love you like Kanye loves Kanye." And from one MAGA narcissist to another MAGA narcissist, witnesses say Weisselberg idolizes Trump. So yes, he loves him like Trump loves Trump.
Alan Weisselberg is defined by what Donald thinks about him.
Weisselberg is one of those total sycophants.
Alan would not take an hour or day off if Donald was in the office.
That doesn't breathe or inhale or exhale without Trump's permission or knowledge.
His office is right next door. He discusses everything with him.
Weisselberg works directly with all the family. There he is, right behind Donald and the kids, who credit him publicly as fiercely loyal. And from growing up in Brooklyn to studying accounting and driving a cab, Weisselberg's big break first came in 1973 with the Trump family, when Donald Trump's father, Fred, a real estate developer, hired him after he applied for a job just listed in a newspaper ad. Donald Trump would put the former cab driver in charge of the big money decisions in the family business, following a pattern where Trump has promoted people far beyond the kind of job they might otherwise get in the open, fair market, which makes them extra eager to keep that post, even push boundaries. Trump himself wrote about Weisselberg in his book, Think Like a Billionaire, dubbing him one of the toughest people in the business when it comes to money. And here's the key part. He did whatever was necessary to protect the bottom line, Trump said. And he was sent to handle all kinds of priorities, from Atlantic City to Miss Universe, to a role that the camera-shy CFO might not have ever wanted, a supporting character on The Apprentice.
Replacing George this week is my chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg. And you think George is tough? Wait till you see Alan. Alan?
I thought that Andy losing his lines of communication was a very serious matter. If this was a military maneuver and he lost his line of communication, he could lose an entire battalion.
That was a simpler time for both of those men, a fictional TV show completing a path from faking it till allegedly making it to faking it again, because if you think about it, that's what they were doing. Weisselberg was now faking and play acting in business, even seeming to help Trump brainstorm some of his lines.
You have to find a way to communicate with your CEO or leader and convince him or her that a change is necessary.
I agree with you.
And to stay in the path of destruction doesn't work.
The fact that you lost the communication system, and as Alan said, if this were a military operation, you would have been wiped out. That was really terrible.
As Alan said, so that was point one. Alan Weisselberg likes it when that happens. He likes when Trump quotes him. He needs that job, and boy, has he tried to earn it. But earn it on Trump's terms. Point number two is about the work. Weisselberg is the eyes and ears of Trump org. He knows everything. He's literally the, quote, only non-family member tasked to help Don Jr. and Eric run the company during Trump's one-term presidency.
Alan Weisselberg managed the trust, and the two boys, Don Jr. and Eric, were the ones that were allegedly managing the company. But Alan was the gatekeeper. Now, mind you, each and every day they would send information back to Donald in the White House, who, of course, was signing still checks on behalf of the Trump organization.
Those checks range from the mundane to the salacious, including money for a now convicted crime, the hush money in the 2016 campaign, which included sham invoices, which Cohen and Trump agreed would be set up by Alan. The Alan in question, Alan Weisselberg, the name on the now infamous recorded 2016 call.
And I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be.
So the three of them in on that. How did Weisselberg get out of his role in that jam? Well, this brings us to another point. Weisselberg can be legally pressed or flipped. It's just that it's never happened against Donald Trump. But when the feds wanted all the goods on that deal, the stuff from that call I just played you, Weisselberg was willing to cooperate as long as he got immunity for himself. And he provided information against Cohen, who went to prison. In a deal like that, legally, you are supposed to tell prosecutors everything. I mean, every last thing. But did Weissman find a way to focus on the things that seem to implicate Cohen more than Trump? Well, we don't have the raw interview transcripts. We just have the fact that is known. 3 men arranged a now convicted crime for the benefit of one of them, Donald Trump. And one of those 3 men did time for it, Michael Cohen. And one of them wiggled away, Alan Weisselberg. So let's be clear. This former Brooklyn cabbie may not ever be a top candidate for a CFO spot at one of the big Wall Street banks. But he does seem to know the streets and where he wants to go, because in other legal scraps, like a probe of the Trump Foundation charity, he also found ways to duck or divert, insisting in testimony there's no policy, he claimed, about basically anything the charity was violating, and then pressed about being listed as a board member there in that case for over a decade. He claimed he didn't know that he was. Now, it still led to another Trump legal loss. They quit, ending the whole charity, facing a fine. There was another legal loss that drove Trump U out of business. Weisselberg, who again is touted as the eyes and the ears of that parent company, was suddenly telling investigators that he just didn't, quote, micromanage when legal matters were involved. And that's despite evidence that emerged that he did choose to eavesdrop on Trump lawyers debating the wisdom of pretending that the for-profit, non-accredited operation should falsely claim to be a university at all. Now, that's another case where Trump lost and paid, literally. But as for tonight's special report, it's another case where Weisselberg just drove away from the scene of the problem, largely legally unscathed. Is this time any different? Well, many who worked with Weisselberg say probably. Some say outright yes. His former daughter-in-law spoke to investigators, so she's telling them stuff. And she's saying in public Weisselberg was in on changing the numbers to push Trump's financial crimes. He's also facing pressure for spending on real estate and schooling for his own family. Those reports could mean legal exposure for crimes allegedly committed to benefit himself, not the Trump organization. All these witnesses saying the heat is huge, with Jennifer Weisselberg, among others, saying he will fold.
There are a lot of differences when Donald says numbers are certain things and then Alan says numbers are certain things. They're not adding up.
I don't think Weisselberg would let his children go to jail. He must be shaking in his boots.
Ari, the reason I believe he'll flip, yes, is because since his behavior since 2017, what I've witnessed is that when he took over as trustee, he was not only nervous, but he started immediately hiding money in escrow confidentially.
Now, those clips may look like TV interviews, and they are, but they could be a lot more than that. I can't tell you what those people are telling the investigators and the grand jurors, but I can tell you they have tremendous legal heat and pressure to be honest rather than commit a new crime of lying to the grand jury. So if what they told me, what they told us on the beat in these witness interviews is the same thing they're telling the investigators, well, that's a big deal. They're key witnesses. They know him. Weisselberg declined to comment and has maneuvered out of other jams before, as I emphasize. So if investigators don't ultimately have enough evidence on him, he still may not feel pressure to cooperate. Or he may try to beat any case at trial. Other Trump loyalists have certainly tried that tack, but most were counting on the backstop of a federal pardon, like what Roger Stone got, but what Trump can no longer give. It's not like Weisselberg does not know that top Trump org people can go to jail for what they do for Trump. You're looking at overhead footage of Michael Cohen reporting in. It was Weisselberg who literally helped seal Cohen's fate. So he knows where the trouble can lead. And that was back when Donald Trump was using gangster talk, dubbing Cohen a, quote, rat. But remember, it was Weisselberg who got immunity and was talking to the feds. So think about what was really happening with everything we know now, then. Remember the tape.
And I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it.
Spoken to Alan about it. 3 Trump org officials arranged that crime for Trump. And he calls the one doing time a rat, while the one talking, Weisselberg, gets to watch from a safe distance. Certainly not called out in public. And this is actually a pretty famous gray area in criminal stories, from informants like Whitey Bulger to stories like the iconic film The Departed. Some people do pull off cooperating while continuing their crimes. It's also a theme the artist Pusha T explores in a song about a cooperating criminal, recounting how, covering his own tracks, he didn't care that we had a legacy he killed. I got to wear that. Break your heart when the man you call your brother be the same one that set in motion all them undercovers. Pusha T continues, quote, from great friends, now it's no affiliation, divided by the time he was facing. We do know Weisselberg pulled off exactly that kind of move, whether it's from songs about snitching or movies like The Departed. He pulled that off once in a Trump org case. He got away. Does he have another ploy like that left in him? Or facing enough pressure, would a man who did cooperate against a peer at Trump org find it in himself to use that same high-stakes move against the boss at Trump org?